And if it were the Crusades, you could think about how long it took, okay? When you get globalization in communications, you have instant access. You can sit, have your meal, and watch people get blown up. But more importantly, what it means is that in non-Western countries, they no longer are dependent on Voice of America and BBC or even CNN. And so Al Jazeera made Muslims globally conscious of what it was to be a global Muslim. For many Muslims around the world, they didn't know very much about people in other places, but with Afghanistan, Afghanistan became this global war. It was a war fought, supported by both Western and Muslim countries, but it was also a war that had major global exposure. And that's why things like Ramallah and Jenin, etc., and Gaza, because if you're watching Al Jazeera, which often in America one doesn't see, you're exposed not only to the horrific bombings that take place and kill innocent Israelis, you're also exposed to the horrific bombings that take place the blowing up of buildings and the slaughter of people that take place in Palestine. And you're sitting in Malaysia watching that, or vice versa. So tremendous impact, but it's multi-layered. Yeah.
Just want to say thank you for the speech. It was pretty enlightening.
God, I looked for very good. You know, it hurt. You really know how it hurt. The other word to really hurt is to say, that was an interesting. Whenever I say interesting to people, they ought to know what it means, but go ahead. Yeah.
Well, considering that all of us are here standing in an institution of higher learning, I've always wondered about the roles that universities, not only here in the United States, but of course throughout the West, how they can play very positive roles in not only disseminating information, but just basically being like their traditional roles have been as centers of public enlightenment, progressive information. As such, what roles do you think that the higher institutions will be playing in the future, in the immediate future? How better can they play these roles in, of course, this huge issue?
We need a significant shift, and we're beginning to see it. The Social Science Research Council, and I've been involved with them on their project, has had a project because what they finally had to admit is that social sciences never took religion seriously, other than as an obstacle to change in general. Okay, and the whole notion of religion was it was part of the tradition. If you were an Iran specialist at Princeton, for example, you might study Islam as part of history, but not in any sense. This was even in the 70s and 80s of its vitality. So by and large, for the social sciences, religion was something, the tradition still existed, but there was a modernization and development theory that said modernization meant progressive westernization, secularization of society. So we begin to move away from that. I teach at the oldest school of international affairs. Until I went there, I became the first professor of religion and international affairs. Just wasn't seen as an area. It took another 10 years before, and I had nothing to do with this, where we introduced a major in politics and culture. That's now a big thing. The American Political Science Association has a whole section on politics and religion. This is something universities have to think about. We live in a world today where, whether we like it or not, for example, religion is a major force in international affairs. And religion is not simply about having religion courses that start at the beginning and stop at the modern period. Okay? So we've got, in fact, the books that we've done with Oxford, my colleagues and I, we write backwards. We start with religion today, and then we get our students to ask questions so that they'll then want to look at the past. Too often we start at the beginning, and then we don't have enough time to get up there. Some kids get bored back then. And our policymakers were that way. I was the first person to ever go out on behalf of the American government to speak on Islam in Muslim countries. We weren't even sure we wanted to do that. I was among the first people to train foreign service officers. The idea that people who do what I did would be asked by governments, Foreign Office in Europe, etc., to provide information. That's the world we live in, and that's the world that universities are set up and can contribute to. But it's got to be done skillfully. I was advising on a project, and somebody said, I have to be very careful about this, so you won't be able to figure out what it is. But somebody said they got a big chunk of money at this university, right? So they're going to spend it. And two of the people were social scientists. Okay? And they said, the social sciences never took religion seriously, so there's dearth of really take. But now we're raising the questions, we're getting more interested. So somebody said, well, what do we do with the money? And they said, create 6 chairs in social science. To which my comment was, if you never took it seriously, we're going to find the 6 people to hold the positions. I mean, you know, I was exaggerating a bit, but there was a kind of naivete, because what they were really saying is we're still pretty much who we are, and then we're going to look at religion because you can get grants to do it, because you can publish on it, etc. That's doing things, that's putting the cart before the horse, or whatever. I want to use another phrase, but I can't use it here, which would be much clearer and direct. But the reality of it is universities are really in a position to do that. Having programs like this, having a lot of international fora, having debates, being really involved. Because, you know, the great thing about what I do is that when I finished what I did, there were no jobs. When I went to professional meetings, a few times I was asked to speak, literally, there'd be 3, maybe 6 people in the room, and 3 of them would leave in the middle of it, discussing the potential role of religion in politics. Okay? This was at a time when it was occurring. Before the Iranian Revolution, for 10 years before, Islam was being used in Libya by Gaddafi to legitimate his rule, Numeri in the Sudan, by Anwar Sadat in Egypt. In Pakistan, both the secular and the Islamist came together under the banner of Islam to get rid of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Nobody saw religion even then as significant. The problem we have today is that we are in this different world. The challenge is, how do we develop groups of younger scholars who work in the area, but more important, citizens who are informed in this area? After 9/11, I can tell you that Senator Clark, who had retired from the Senate, Joe Biden, whom I met with at the time, senators that I briefed on the Hill, almost every one of them in private would have said, not all, but many, you know, I never paid attention to the Middle East, let alone Islam. I had a senior person because other areas are more important. I had, you know, a senior staff member. They would do the research, hand me stuff, kind of gear me, and then I'd go in and vote. But now, I suddenly realized this has become so integral. I've got to understand religion in the Muslim world. But it's more than understanding religion in the Muslim world. If you want to look at the dynamics of the breakup of Yugoslavia, you've got to understand, even though that wasn't a religious war, the role that religion played. So I think that that's what's got to happen. And more student groups that actually get in, discuss and debate these issues. What I'll do is take 2 questions at the same time and answer.
I have 2 myself.
Well, I can do 3 because I'm Catholic and Trinitarian, but you've got to stay with 2 very briefly.
First question. It's about foreign policy. Many experts, specialists, doctors will tell us that the problems of the United States come from its foreign policy. We know that, and we still don't see it changing. Even if presidents change, this foreign policy is still the same. Is there a chance that it's going to change one day, or are we still going to keep doing
Second question.
Second question is more personal to you. How did you get attracted to the field of Islamic studies when nobody was paying attention to Islam? Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. I remember 2 years ago in Newsweek cover Pakistan being the greatest threat to the West, and if you see the daily news, you would think Peshawar is much worse than Kabul or Baghdad. So I was wondering, do you have any hope of any progress in the country, and what can be done and what we can do here locally?
I think that in terms of Pakistan, I think that I have some hope, but I think that the risk is many Pakistanis now will, as I said earlier, will now welcome, because they felt the brunt of the danger of the Taliban. They don't welcome, but they accept U.S. presence. But if you actually ask them what they think of the U.S. or what they want, as with the Iraqis, or at least very often, leave. You know, they want us to come in, but get out soon. So the real challenge we have is, how do we move the Pakistanis, because there are elements in the Pakistani government and military that have their own agendas. How do we work with them to effectively do what we can do and then get out of there as fast as we can? Because otherwise we will be brushstroked. In other words, there are endemic problems within Pakistan. They existed before. They may continue to exist. We can't solve all those problems. Problems of sectarianism, you know, of regionalism, we can't solve those. With regard to the other 2 questions, on the foreign policy issue, I think that things are getting better, but nowhere near. I can say I am an Obama supporter. On the other hand, if you look at my blogs on the Huffington Post,